Call the meeting to order. A couple agenda changes. We'll remove the revenue update by Carla, and we're going to add recognition of our outgoing county clerk, Margie Mullins. With that, I will ask the clerk in her final board meeting to do her last roll call. Start the meeting.
Thank you. Crosby? Here. Fellers?
Here.
Fiducia?
Here.
Girl?
Present.
Goral? Hoffman?
Present, and I'll miss you.
Jury?
And Mr. Mullins, Ms. Mullins, I'm here, and it's going to be awful strange without me with us.
Thank you. Kelly?
Here.
McDonald?
Present.
Nicolosi?
Here.
Red? Salgado?
Present.
Schultz?
Here.
Tassoni?
Present.
Webster?
Here.
Westcott?
Present. Thank you for your years of service.
Thank you. Wilson?
Present.
Biondo?
Present.
Booker?
Present. Thank you, Mark.
Boomer?
Here.
20 present, no absent.
Okay, thank you, Clerk Mullins. With that, we are going to ask everybody to stand for the prayer and pledge, and Mrs. Red will lead us in the prayer.
Thank you, Heavenly Father, for bringing us together to do the business of the county. We ask that you bless everyone here tonight and their families. We ask that you bless our former clerk as she retires from our presence and goes on her way. We hope that she enjoys her retirement. We ask that you do the business, help us make great decisions as we attempt to do the business, do your business. These are asked in your name. Amen.
Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mrs. Red. If the board will indulge me, I want to recognize Clerk Mullins this evening for her many, many years of service to the community and to the county. And I will say in my 1 year as chairman, I've really enjoyed working with her. I know some board members will have some things to say very shortly. But I would like, if Margie could come on up here, she starts close, she'll get closer, to welcome her family who's here tonight. I know her daughter Jill is here with her child. And just want to present Clerk Mullins with the Chairman's Service Excellence Award. I, Frank Haney, Chairman of the Winnebago County Board, hereby recognize County Clerk Margie Mullins for her many years of outstanding service to the residents of Winnebago County. This award recognizes her dedicated professionalism, integrity, and sustained commitment to excellence. Clerk Mullins represents the very best values of our community and has served as a great example of what our community deserves in its public servants. So thank you very much, Margie.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So there's many things that I could say. And I think I should just keep it short and sweet. It's been an honor and a pleasure to be here, to be with the people of Winnebago County, to serve them. They put their trust in me and their faith in me. I will tell you, I have grandsons that are glad they don't have to put signs anymore up. I have grandchildren that are happy they don't have to walk in a parade anymore. But overall, I think that I've met a lot of great people. There's 20 of them right out here right now. I have a fabulous, fabulous staff who makes me look, they made me look good every day. And we worked as a wonderful family together. And I'm going to miss everybody. I'm not going to miss the work, but I'm going to miss the people and the relationships and the gossip maybe that might have gone on. But I want to thank everybody, my family, the staff, and all of you for making it a lot easier to be the county clerk that I wanted to be. Thank you.
Thank you, Clerk Mullins. Our next item of business, it's not very often that Judge Collins, normally when she's here, she's number one. Tonight we asked her to take a back seat just this one time to Clerk Mullins, but I just want to say how much I've appreciated working with Judge Collins and her great passion for her work, not only as a judge, but in finding grants to bring extra dollars to the community around a very important topic, domestic violence. And so with that, I'd ask Judge Collins to come on up and give us a quick update. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, thanks for inviting me. Thanks for having me here. And it's particularly nice to have cake here, so that's great. I'll come more often. And I'm always happy to come in second after Margie Mullins. I mean, she's the best, so it's an honor to be here with you on this special night. I think the chairman's already passed out kind of a list of the grants, and I kind of wanted to just give you an overview of what our domestic violence courts are and what we do. We really kind of started out in 1994 when we started our Domestic Violence Coordinating Council, and I was the chairman of that council. And through our work on that council, we decided we wanted to start actively writing for grants. So myself and two others started writing grants, and we got our first grant, as you can see from the program that was handed out. We got our first grant in October of 2011. Now, part of the reason that we're so focused on getting grants for domestic violence is we know what a scourge this is on our community. In the United States, an average of 20 people are physically abused by intimate partners every minute. That equates to more than 10 million abuse victims annually. We know in the city of Rockford, 30% of their calls are domestic violence related calls. And we know that in the United States, 15 million children are raised in homes where they are exposed and witness domestic violence. We know the long-term effects that has on these children and how that affects all of us in the community. So we knew we had to do something to reevaluate how we were handling domestic violence cases in our courts and in our community assessment of this issue. So we started writing grants. We got our first court training and improvement grant from the Department of Justice, the Office of Violence Against Women. With that money, we were able to start our specialized domestic violence courts. We have a specialized domestic violence court in our system. That court handles all the intimate partner criminal cases and all the intimate partner related family cases. So if it's an intimate partner divorce case that has intimate partner violence, then that is handled by our domestic violence division. The list of the grants that we have, I just wanted to provide you with a little list so you can see over the years through both Department of Justice funding, through the Office of Violence Against Women and the state, we've been able to bring into this county $4,794,899. It's not just me, too, that we have a team that's working on this, and we've got a lot of great people who work really hard on this issue. I think even more, and those monies are critical. Because of them, we've been able to establish ourselves as one of very few mentor courts across the country. So we now have people visiting from all over the country, our court system here, to see how we're handling domestic violence cases, was because we've been designated by the Department of Justice as an official mentor court on domestic violence issues. Through our efforts with the Family Violence Coordinating Council, we've trained over 2,100 professionals through the Family Violence Coordinating Council. We've sent 183 local professionals to training through using OVW funds. No county funds are used for this. We have trained over 1,000 people locally using OVW funds, the Department of Justice funds. We recently got a grant from the federal government specifically to deal with domestic violence homicide, because our goal is to eliminate domestic violence homicide in our community. So through that grant, we have trained over 400 officers on the lethality assessment, which is an evidence-based assessment tool that the officers on every call now use when they're going through their victim's interview. So over 400 officers have been trained locally on that. We have handed out over 100 telephones to officers, so that when they're on this scene, they can connect victims with advocates in an effort to improve victim safety. And what this will do, hopefully, will reduce the amount of violence, reduce the amount of recidivism and repeat calls that the police officers have to make, and of course improve the safety of the homes that our children live in, which will improve the safety of the community. We have seen an enormous response to this. We've had, over these high-risk assessments, we know that 63% of these high-risk assessments that the officers have been doing since November 1st of 2017 have been labeled high risk for lethality. So we've had a significant portion of them who have availed themselves of services, and we're working on increasing that number. So we just wanted to let you know what we're doing in the domestic violence area in our courts. We are active, aggressive grant writers. We know that the situation that all of us are in this community is difficult with financial resources. And without the funding that we received from the Department of Justice through the Office of Violence Against Women, we wouldn't have been able to accomplish as much as we have. A big partner in that has been the county board. The county board has sponsored, you may not know it, but several of these grants are county grants. Some of them are court grants, and some of them are county grants. And we've gotten those grants because of the great relationship we've had, where I can go over and talk to the chairman and say, this is the grant, and give him a copy of the grant, this is what we're going to write for, this is what it means, this is the amount of money you have to expend, which is zero. And the county board, the county chairman has always been very willing to go along with us on these grants and to cooperate with us in the suggestions that we need to improve our system. So without the members of the county board and the county chairman agreeing to partner with us on this, we wouldn't have been able to receive all these grants too. So you're also a partner with us on these grants. Our legal researcher on our grants with the domestic violence homicide is NIU. So we've established a real close working relationship with NIU and their research staff to help us show whether or not this domestic violence homicide project is in fact reducing homicides in our community. So that's what we've been up to over these years, and since, and it's pretty impressive, I think, that we've raised, just under $5 million since 2011, working on these grants. So our pledge to you is that we will continue to work aggressively on this issue. Our goal is to eradicate domestic violence. We want a safe, healthy community, because we know what it means to every one of us in this room here today. And we will continue those efforts. We're happy to talk to any of you individually if you'd like to come over. We do have visits from other areas that come to watch our court, so if any of you ever want to come over and hear more about it, we're perfectly willing to do that. So thank you for your help with these projects. We appreciate it, and we'll do more together as we move forward. Thank you.
We have a couple hands up. First I have Mr. Jury.
Yes, Mr. Jury.
Thank you. Judge Rosemary Collins. Winnebago County is a better place today than it was yesterday by just you being here and sitting in the seat that you sit in. I've been with you since day one on your quest for what you do. You don't only do it, you act it, you see that it gets done. You understand the heartbeat of people. And I'm proud, as a county board member, to call you Judge Collins. And we're going to miss you. We have all the respect in the world for you, because there's number one thing that you do. You know how to treat people. Thank you, and God bless you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Mr. Jury. Mr. Fellers.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Judge. Quick question. You mentioned you provide cell phones to officers to hand out. Are those so that victims have a guaranteed method of communication?
No. The cell phones are the officer's equipment.
Okay.
So when they go to the scene, when a victim is an intimate partner case, and then when they do the assessment, if it's a high-risk case, then they find out it's high risk by administering the lethality screen, which are 11 questions developed by Johns Hopkins University. So after they do the screen, if it's a high risk, they say, I'm afraid for the safety of you and your family, and I'd like to connect you with an advocate who may be able to help you with safety planning. Then they can call the advocate and they hand the phone to them. So that way, right there, they can connect with an advocate. And then we've hired advocates through this also. And I'm not sure if the one that was handed out to you also has a list of the people that we've employed. I know I gave a chairman a copy of this before. I have copies of this too, which also says the people that we've employed under there and the positions that we have. Is that on yours? All right, well then I'll leave these. I have these, so I might as well leave them. So we've hired advocates, and then the advocates will talk to them in the scene and then reach out to them later to try to get them into safety planning and services that are available in the community that they might not know about. The police officer holds on to that phone. They go home with the phone. It's part of their equipment, like a gun and everything. It's part of the equipment that's checked out to them. They check it back in.
Do we have a program that provides you cell phones for victims of domestic abuse when they maybe get out of the whatever bad situation that they are in, so that they have that sort of means of communication? Do we have any programs that we're running like that now?
I think Remedies does that, and Remedies is our domestic violence shelter, and I think they do have a program like that. I don't know how many phones they have available. I know that they're always looking for used cell phones to turn into use. So I think Remedies does have such a program, but the phones themselves may not be a big number of available phones.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fellers. Mr. Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Firstly, I'd like to thank you for your service. Secondly, thank you for the short talks we always have. They were always short. And lastly, God bless you.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Any other questions or comments by board members on Judge Collins' presentation? Yes, Mrs. Gorel.
Judge Collins, I have been so privileged to know you in all the different things you have done with not only domestic violence, but with children, and going through the different ways of children to still maintain relationships with their moms and dads on weekends. Mm-hmm. That was one of the greatest things you did, which prevented a lot more violence and anger. And I don't know what we're going to do without you. I sure hope you have a clone out there someplace.
Well, and thank you for mentioning that, because one of the grants that we have in here is our grant for Safe Harbor. Safe Harbor is our supervised visitation and visitation exchange facility, and that's partly funded by county fees that we assess through fees. You have allowed us to assess an $8 fee to help pay for the visitation exchange. That's the most we can ask for under the law, under the current state law, which just isn't enough. But we've also gotten federal grants to help do our supervised visitation program. So, and that's designed just for that, because we want children to have a healthy, safe relationship with their parents. And that facility helps do that. So thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Gorel. And just to be clear, Judge Collins isn't going anywhere for a year. She'll still have her for the better part of 18. But thank you.
That's right. I won't leave until December, and I do love cake. So
putting on the radar early. Well, thank you, Judge Collins, for your time. Really appreciate it this evening.
I will leave these here, and so you can pass them out, which it also has, because I think that the fascinating thing about these grants too is how many people we employ and how many trainings we do, because that also has a real effect on the community. When people come in for trainings, they go to our restaurants, they go to our shops, and so it really has an economic effect that isn't really reflected in these numbers. So I'll give these to you, and then they can be passed out.
Thank you, Judge.
Thank you.
Next item of business, board member correspondence. Any questions, comments by board members? Thank you, Judge. Oh, I skipped like 4 things here. I apologize. We'll go to approval of minutes. May I please have a motion to approve the minutes from December 7th meeting and to lay over the minutes from December 21st, 2017, please. Motion by Mrs. Crosby, a second by Mr. Biondo and Mr. Jury. Any questions on the minutes before the board? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. Next item of business, announcements and communications. Clerk Mullins.
The listed below were received as correspondence.
And we will place those on file. Thank you very much, Clerk Mullins. And now I think we are ready for board member correspondence. Mr. Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have one announcement. It's from the Winnebago County Veterans Association. They're offering 2 $1,000 scholarships and 2 $500 scholarships. And the person to call is Ray Hughes at number 815-979-8278. The students applying for one of the scholarships must be related to an honorary discharged veteran. It could be a grandparent, parent, aunt, uncle, or a sibling. So I encourage people to pass it on. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson, and I might ask Julia to help us get that up on social media here in the next few days. Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Any other board member comments? Seeing none, we'll go on to the chairman's report, and I'll move through this rather quickly. Under Sheriff's budget, department budget, Sheriff Caruana will be back in town, I think, either today or over the weekend. I'm going to meet with him on Monday morning, and there's 9 or 10 items we'll be discussing, and I'm optimistic that we'll have a fruitful discussion. Host fees, there was an initial discussion. I know it's been a while since we've had a board meeting because we missed a cycle because of a canceled board meeting. We had a very good discussion in Mr. Westcott's Economic Development Committee around host fees and an initial draft of a discussion. That discussion will go back, it will stay in committee, and there's going to be another discussion coming up here. He'll touch on the date on that, but that host fee discussion is ongoing, and it will go to economic development one more time, and then obviously will be making its way to the full board for consideration. The other thing that kicked off this week was strategic planning, and very excited about this. I know a number of you were involved so far, a number of community stakeholders, as well as a number of internal stakeholders. So the NIU strategic planning process is underway. I do need to, under Chairman's comments, officially accept the resignation of Clerk Mullins. It's a formality, so that's what we're doing right here, is formally accepting that, and then we will be appointing our new county clerk to fill out the remainder of Clerk Mullins' term here momentarily. Next item of update is 911. There was an initial discussion in December about a potential consolidation of 911 facilities, Winnebago County and the city of Rockford. Discussions continue. I do not see a formal recommendation coming to the board anytime in the next couple of months. However, there's been some very fruitful discussions. The ETSB board, or the 911 board, has met and wants to do one more study, comprehensive in nature, about a county-only option, of course the city of Rockford option, and then maybe any alternatives there. There has been many follow-up discussions with mayors and growing discussion about two things. Number one, a short-term solution, and then a long-term permanent solution. One of the reasons we're looking at a permanent solution other than the status quo is that there's equipment, next-gen equipment, that's coming to end of life, and there's some concern that we cannot buy that in duplication again. So there's nothing immediate, but there's a lot of good discussions right now. In terms of the short term and the more immediate, several mayors have offered, and we're going to look to take them up on that offer, is since there was some discussions about pay equity, some municipalities not paying, that goes back to an agreement many years ago, other entities paying some but not based on the model. We are looking at a short term, some of the municipalities chipping in to assist in funding of 911 services here in the near term before a permanent solution is settled at. And that would help in a potential phasing discussion. These are discussions directly with the municipalities. There's no specifics at this time, but discussions are ongoing. And that was a recommendation that came from several of the mayors to help in the short term and then slow down so we can take our time and figure out the best long-term solution. And I do appreciate that. Lastly, I just wanted to make a comment The ACT initiative has been a major topic of discussion in the media in recent weeks, and I would just want to point out a couple things. Number one, that is something I am absolutely deeply committed to personally as the elected chairman. This is a topic that is on the DuPage County website and something that they've made a commitment to. When we do not have enough money to go around to do all the good we want to do, looking at reform, looking at streamlining and consolidation in a manner that's transparent with the board and the community, I think that's a concept that many of us embrace, whether or not we attach a catchy title or mantra to it. So just wanted to comment on that. With that, I would move on to our next item of business, which is the consent agenda, and I'd ask the board for a motion to approve our consent agenda. I have a motion by Mr. Jury, a second by Mr. Fellers and Mr. Hoffman. Any discussion on the consent agenda before the board? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none, motion passes. Consent agenda approved. Thank you very much. With the board's blessing, what I'd like to do at this point is move one of our appointments up ahead of standing committees, and that would be the county clerk appointment. Just a little background on that. So Clerk Mullins announced her retirement, and that is effective on January 31st. She was very specific and upfront in her request that we have her replacement in place immediately so there's no gap. In fact, our new county clerk is going to be asked tomorrow to sign documents that are desperately needed for early voting. So there is a time element to this. In talking to the state's attorney's office multiple times, the appointment is the chairman's prerogative with the full approval, with the approval of the board. I will be deferring to my good friend Mr. Hoffman on that recommendation this evening, but I do want you guys to be aware of the process. I think you are. All board members received all 10 resumes. There was public interviews, the media, a couple of the media outlets attended. I want to formally thank our Democrat caucus chairman, Joe Hoffman, and our outgoing clerk, Clerk Mullins, for sitting in on the interviews, and I really appreciate that. I did, as a matter of record, I don't want to hide from that, I did make the comment that one of the things that was important to me in this process, and this is not a commentary on candidates on the ballot, but that I did not want to see a recommendation on a candidate on the ballot when we have a race in a ballot, and the ballot is set for the November election. And I am happy that that is going to be the case, but I want to also be very clear that is not a commentary on any of the candidates on the ballot in any way, shape, or form, and no disrespect intended whatsoever. But with that, I would turn to Mr. Hoffman. Thank him again for his leadership in this process. And Mr. Hoffman, would you like to make the recommendation, or would you like me? I'll defer to you, sir.
I will tell you what our recommendation is. First, I just want to say that I thank you for your words. I regret that I don't know that the Democrats have the same feeling that you do, that we shouldn't have been allowed to make the choice the way we wanted to. I hope that someday we trust each other enough to feel better about that. I don't think it's there today. Having said that, we selected a very strong candidate, a very popular candidate with our caucus to fill the temporary spot. Her name is Tiana McCall, and I'd like to welcome her to the county, and that is our person that we selected. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hoffman, and I absolutely agree with the recommendation, and I see that Tiana is here today, so if you don't mind, Tiana, if you don't mind standing and just letting everybody say hello to you, I really appreciate you being here. Thank you, Tiana. Tiana will come to the county from Congresswoman Bustos' office. She's had a number of public roles in the community, has an MBA from Rockford University, and I'm personally also very excited about Tiana and appreciate your interest in this position. And so we do have a motion by Mr. Hoffman on Tiana McCall to fill the vacancy by Clerk Mullins, and I have a second by Mr. Girl. and a second by Mr. Tassoni, Mr. Wilson, Mrs. Red, Mrs. Gorel, Mr. Fellers. Thank you very much for all the seconds. Any comments by board members? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thank you very much. We have a new county clerk as of the same day that Clerk Mullins will be retiring. We will have our new clerk, Tiana McCall. So thank you very much and congratulations, Tiana. Thank you. Next item of business, our standing committee reports. Finance Committee, Mr. Biondo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Finance Committee, I would like to read in Budget Amendments 2018-013, Animal Service Donation, to be laid over Budget Amendment 2018-014, Finalized Health Insurance Allocations, to be laid over Budget Amendment 2018-15, Problem Solving Court Position Line Item, Budget Amendment 2018-16 is County Board line item transfers. I'd like to read all those in.
Thank you, Mr. Biondo.
The vote in the Finance and other committees that made these decisions were all unanimous. Maybe there was one, but I think they're all unanimous. I would like to therefore move to suspend the rules on all five.
We have a motion by Mr. Biondo to suspend the rules on all budget item amendments that he just read in, which would be B, C, D, and E.
Correct.
I have a motion by Mr. Biondo to suspend the rules. I have a second by Mr. Gurl, Mr. Salgado, and Mr. Jury. Oh, we have a second, so Mr. Jury.
On one of these issues. Will somebody explain to me what a problem-solving court position line item transfer is? What is it? Is it going to help the courts run any faster, any better?
Yes, I think we have Mr. Jakeway is here tonight, and I want to thank him for being here. And if you don't mind, Mr. Jakeway, could you give a 1-minute overview of that for the group? And we'll ask you to find a mic, sir.
Thank you, Chairman. This is a revenue neutral line item transfer within the 1% public safety sales tax. There's $224,000 of funds identified to transfer regular salary, and that's for this position of a problem-solving court senior administrative assistant. And that's going to be one member of our problem-solving court team that supports vet courts, the drug court, mental health court, youth recovery court. These are programs that are funded both by county dollars and by grant dollars. Currently, this team of 4 people, or will be 4 people, administrate $1.5 million worth of federal funds that support these programs. There's a tremendous amount of data, analysis, and computation that's required for these grants, as well as new certification standards by the Illinois Supreme Court. The workload is such that this position is necessary, and we've identified the funding source to do this. I wrote a 2-page paper, or letter I should say, which puts this all out in greater detail. It's attached to the budget amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Jakeway. Follow up, Mr. Jury.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. So in other words, you're telling me, the way I understand it, this is really going to speed up things. We're going to solve a lot of problems. We're not going to have no backup. They're going to move things right along. Or is this going to be business as usual?
What I'm suggesting to you is that this position is going to keep us in compliance with in excess of $1.5 million worth of grant funds, keep us in compliance with our reporting requirements to the Illinois Supreme Court, so we can continue to provide these programs for the citizens of Winnebago County.
One final question. So how do we find out if this is working? How can you come back and tell us? Because quite honestly, I don't think it's gonna help one bit. That's my own opinion.
Well, if I could jump in on that, thank you, Mr. Jury and Mr. Jakeway. One of the things that I think we would benefit from is, through our committee process, is getting an update and inviting in our department heads to give updates on progress and outcomes. And I would also give some kudos to Mr. Jakeway, especially in the last several months of working with Carla on a number of items, even during tough budget discussions. So I appreciate, and I think Mr. Jury's getting to the heart of a very important topic, which is how do we know, how can we feel good about outcomes? And I think we're really going to look to plug that into our committee process. In the case of the courts, we could talk to our friend Mr. Fiducia and ask him to schedule that in for updates, and I think it's a very good point. Thank you, Mr. Jury. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again to you, Tom, there's nothing against you. It's that nobody in this room, the 20 people sitting in this room, and I'm going to repeat it, not against spending money. Not one of them. If we can see the value of where it goes. Once you establish that, you don't have any problem, whether it's public safety or whatever it is. If we can see if it works, you'll get it. So I'm going to be watching this program. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jury. Mr. Wilson, and again, right now we have B, C, D, and E on the floor, motioned and seconded just to suspend the rules so that we could vote on these items tonight, but we do have a question. Mr. Wilson.
Yes, ma'am, is to follow what Gary was saying. Everything that dollars go up from us or from whomever should be measured. So I agree with you, Gary.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Appreciate it. And again, thank you. Oh, Mr. Jakeway, and a follow-up.
Mr. Chairman, if you'd like a response to that, I can. We have to prove on an annual basis that we're using these funds wisely. The federal government has strict guidelines, and we must prove to them through our grant reporting and grant application process. These are programs about people's lives and about restoring people to good citizenry. We know that prison is the most expensive and the least effective option out there. We need to be working with people. That's going to be the future of criminal justice. And the best way to see results, because these aren't large programs, these have small populations, is to come to a graduation ceremony for drug court, for tip court. We just had a graduation ceremony for veteran court this week. I invite and encourage you to come to one of those.
We'll make sure we get that invitation passed along as they come with the different graduation ceremonies, and I appreciate your comments. And I would just say this, one of the things I want to do a better job of this year is making sure we're plugging in department updates into our committee process, and I know that's been a request of some of our committee chairmen and some of our department heads, so I think we can marry that up very nicely. So again, thank you, Mr. Jury, Mr. Wilson, and Mr. Jakeway for your comments. Any other comments? Right now, all we have is a motion to suspend the rules. Mr. Webster. Second. We got a second. It's before us right now. All those in favor of suspending the rules, which would allow us to then take a formal vote tonight, signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion to suspend the rules passes. Mr. Biondo.
Yes, thank you. As far as the services there for the court too, it's $24,000 to cover the 9 months remaining in 2018. It doesn't include next year, but it is grant funded this year. So I'll take each one of these and just put the amount with it. The budget amendment, I'd like to move for the approval of budget amendments 2018-13 through 2018-16. Items A, B, C, and D. I'm sorry, B, C, and D. E.
We have a motion by Mr. Biondo to take this as a package of items B, C, D, and E. The motion by Mr. Biondo, a second by Mr. Jury and Mr. Salgado. Any questions on items B, C, D, or E? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. Items approved. Mr. Biondo.
All right, I'd like to make a motion to approve a resolution authorizing the settlement of pending litigation for Donna and Carl Gaziorowski versus the Winnebago County. It was for $50,000, and I so move.
Got a motion by Mr. Biondo on item F, the authorizing the settlement of pending litigation. I have a second. I saw a hand up, Mr. Jury and Mr. Girl. If you don't mind, Mr. Biondo, just a 30-second overview on that.
Sure. The case was where a plaintiff was attending an event in Memorial Hall. She walked down the steps and there was no banisters on the last three, and she fell, broke her ankle. Between medical bills and other things, it would have been anywhere between $95,000 and $190,000. So, and for medical help, etc. So it was actually, I think, a good deal for us to get it for $50,000. At least the committee felt so.
Thank you, Mr. Biondo, on your explanation on item F. Any other questions by board members on item F? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Item approved. Mr. Biondo.
That concludes our report.
Thank you very much, Mr. Biondo. Next item of business, zoning, Mr. Webster.
Barring any hiccups, this should go a little soon. Your zoning committee has 6 items on your agenda tonight, and all of these are in for a first reading, so I suggest leaving them lay over. So for the record, I will just read them. Number 1 is Z 1917. Number 2 is SU 1117. Number 3 is V 0317. Number 4 is V 0417. 5 is V 0517, and 6 is Z 2017. And those will be laid over to our next committee meeting, to our next board meeting.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other items, Mr. Webster?
Oh, that's it.
Short and sweet. Thank you very much, Mr. Webster. Next item of business, Economic Development Committee, Mr. Westcott. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, we have a resolution granting authority to the Winnebago County Board Chairman to execute the documents necessary to make a $20,000 revolving loan fund to, get ready, Buddha Belly Incorporation. We don't look at me when you're laughing.
It's a catchy, memorable name. Good business. We have a motion by Mr. Westcott to approve item B under economic development. I got a second by Mr. Wilson, Mrs. Red, and Mr. Salgado. Any discussion by board members on item B under economic development that's before the board? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
No.
One no vote by Mr. Schultz. All other board members, yes vote. Motion passes. Mr. Westcott.
That concludes my report, and we will have a meeting on the 30th of this month, and it'll be at 5:30, 5:15 and 5:10, I would believe. And one thing I want to say to Margie before we go, I've always wanted to say this, instead of Margie, Margie, Margie. In behalf of the Brady Bunch. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Westcott. Next item of business. Operations and Administrative Committee, Mr. Jury.
Margie, you thought I was going to let you out early. We got a lot. Okay, your Operation Administrative Committee. First resolution is a resolution appointing an authorized agent for IMRS accounts, and I move for its adoption.
We have a motion by Mr. Jury and a second by Mr. Hoffman on item B. Any discussion by board members? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Mr. Jury.
Thank you. Your next resolution is a resolution appointing Chapman Cutler LLP as bond counseling for Winnebago County, and I move for its adoption.
We have a motion by Mr. Jury on item C on the appointment of Chapman Cutler LLP as bond counsel. May I have a second? Mr. Hoffman on the second. Any discussion by board members? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. Thank you very much, Mr. Jury.
Thank you. The next resolution is a resolution on garbage collection services, and I move for its adoption.
We have a motion by Mr. Jury on item D, awarding bids to for garbage collection services. Motion by Mr. Jury. May I have a second? I have a second by Mr. Webster and Mr. Nicolosi. Mr. Webster on the question.
Remind me again, Gary, who was it won the contract?
We have to ask Ann.
Rock River Disposal.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Ann. Mr. Nicolosi.
Possible.
Okay. Let the record reflect that Mr. Nicolosi will abstain from this vote. Any other questions by board members on item D, the garbage collection services, the awarding of the bid to Rock River Disposal? Any other questions? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? And Mr. Nicolosi is abstaining. Motion passes. Mr. Jury.
Thank you, Chairman Haney. The next resolution is a resolution authorizing the administrator of River Bluff Nursing Home to enter into a participating provider agreement, and I move for its adoption.
We have a motion by Mr. Jury authorizing the administrator RP for River Bluff. May I have a second? I have Mr. Webster and Mr. Girl on the second. Any discussion by board members? Seeing none, I have a quick question by Mr. Salgado.
I do have a question. So I see down on H and item H, and then this one that we're doing are those similarly related? Can you maybe elaborate a little bit? So why there's two positions, one for the administrator and one for the management company?
Yes, I'm going to refer to Carla to offer clarification. Carla, a difference between E and a difference between H.
I think Ann can explain E, but E just authorizes the administrator to enter into an agreement, participating provider agreement. Who is that with? Yeah. The participating provider agreement for River Bluff?
That's not,
okay. It's just authorizing the administrator to enter into an agreement. It's not appointing an administrator.
So then on H, if I may, Ann, H, just so we draw the distinction between E and H.
H is to authorize the management to contract for management of the home.
Gotcha.
And this is something we need, because Margie and I have gone up and down those elevators quite a few times, and you're going to have to keep going up and down. So I move for its adoption.
Yes, we have item E before the board. We have a motion and we have a second. So the item is on the floor before the board already. Any other questions by board members on item E? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. Thank you very much. We have a crazy computer.
Okay, the next resolution we have is a resolution for new elevator maintenance service contract, and I move for its adoption.
We have a motion by Mr. Jury on item F, resolution authorizing a new elevator maintenance contract. A motion by Mr. Jury. May I have a second? I have a second by Mrs. Red, Mr. Girl. Thank you very much. Any discussion by board members? Yes, Mr. Girl.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Chairman, Jury, does this save us any dollars, this new contract?
Ann?
thank you, 14.5%.
Oh, well, 14.5% of what we're currently paying.
Thank you very much, Ann, and thank you for the question. Any other questions by board members? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. Mr. Jury.
Thank you. Next resolution we have is a resolution for therapy services, and I move for its adoption.
We have a motion by Mr. Jury on item G, the new therapy service contract. May I have a second? May I have a second, please? Mrs. Crosby and Mr. Hoffman, any discussion by board members on item G? Yes, Mrs. Gorel.
Where is this going to be at?
So I'll ask for a clarification on item G. And if
Yes, please.
Okay, Mr. Jury, I'll ask Ann on that.
I'm sorry, what do you mean by where it's,
Where will the therapy be held?
oh, it's at River Bluff.
River Bluff.
And the winner of this contract is Genesis, and they're our current contract provider. Except we got much better rates this time.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Ann, and thank you for the question, Mrs. Gorel. Any follow-up questions by board members on item G? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. Thank you very much, Mr. Jury.
And finally, our last resolution is a resolution authorizing the management of River Bluff Nursing Home by contract. And I move for its adoption.
Motion by Mr. Jury authorizing the management of River Bluff Nursing Home by contract. I have a second by Mr. Hoffman. Any discussion by board members? Yes, Mr. Schultz.
Could I get a synopsis as to why we believe that this way of approaching the management is the best idea?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Schultz, and I'll turn that to Carla.
For several years, the financial condition of the home has deteriorated. Last year we lost $1.9 million. We'll probably have a loss between $1.5 and $2 million this year. This type of management's been successful in other counties. This particular company has worked with Champaign County and turned them from a loss position to break even within 6 months. McHenry County and DeKalb County have had management services provided to them in their nursing homes, which has been also very successful. DeKalb County has no property tax levy and makes a small profit every year. And McHenry County, after a number of years, discontinued their management services who had worked with their administrator for a period of years, and then they felt that their administrator could run the home after working with their management company. So I think it's proven to be successful for county governments that are operating nursing homes.
Thank you, Mr. Schultz, for the question. And just a follow-up, since we do have had a question or two on this, Carla, can you just give a very quick 15-second background on the funding of the nursing home? Where do revenue sources come to fund River Bluff? Just so we don't confuse that with general fund or 1% discussions.
Right. The River Bluff revenues are contained in a separate fund. There's a property tax levy. That's a small portion of the revenue, and the majority of the revenue comes from Medicaid, Medicare, private pay, and insurance.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Carla. And then a follow-up by Mr. Fellers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If we run a deficit, like you said, we have 1.5 million, where does that come from?
Reserves.
So it does come from the general, our reserve funding?
The reserve funding in the River Bluff Nursing Home Fund. Not the general fund, but if we continue in this trend, eventually we would have to transfer money from the general fund.
Do you have an update on what those reserves are?
I don't have final numbers for 17 yet.
So they're closing out fiscal year 17 and it'll have final reserve numbers within a few weeks, I think is the right number, and that is just ahead of the overall audit process. But we will get before when the folks get the audit numbers from us on the projected final reserve numbers, we will make those available to the public and of course to the board immediately, but that's just being tightened up here in the next couple of weeks. Did I see another hand up? I apologize if I missed it. Mr. Webster.
Mr. Travers asked a question I was going to ask, but maybe I'll ask it in a little different way. You're projecting that this year there'll be a $1.5 to $2 million loss?
Correct. That's what our initial projections are, but they're not final.
Okay. Do you think there's enough in the reserves to cover that?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. That's where I'm going with that.
Thank you, Mr. Webster. Mrs. Gorel.
Let's also remember that we're going to be heading into some problems because of the fact that with the federal government and with the state government, Medicaid comes out of that, and the biggest provider out there is Medicaid. So you have to look at where the money is coming from, and many times River Bluff and other nursing homes that take Medicaid or Medicare can be 3 months and behind before we get them from the state or the federal government, because one feeds the other. And with right now with our I haven't looked at heard the news today because I've been too upset. First of all, had they settled, and are we still, our government not in business as of today, or did they finally make an agreement and we're back in business?
Safe, we're back in business.
Okay, so.
For now.
For now. No, they weren't really, but. Okay.
Thank you, Mrs. Gorel. Appreciate it. And Carla, on a follow-up.
When we close out a month, we do accrue for any revenue that's not been paid but is due us. So when we look at a loss, we're not talking just on a cash basis. We've accrued that revenue that has not yet been paid to us.
Thank you, Mrs. Gorel, for the comment, and Carla as well. And then a follow-up by Mr. Webster.
Yeah, one more. I forgot to ask. How many residents do we have there now, and how much more room is there? How many more residents are there room for, in other words?
I believe there's 240 beds. Today I looked and we had 191 residents. Last year at this time we had around 216.
191 currently. And last year it was 216?
Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Webster. Follow-up by Mrs. Gorel.
Mr. Webster, one of the things with nursing homes, and you'll see it's kind of every year happening, at the beginning of the year, from like December until February, we have a lot of residents that expire. And then we start building back up from that point. One of the reasons we're short on some of the residents, of having residents out there, is because of the fact in today's world we have a lot of people who truly don't want to work at nursing homes, and so we don't have the staff. State says we have to have so much staff, and if we can't have that much staff, then we have to reduce our residents. We do have probably out there about 12, at least 12 I think, of those that are paid residents, and then the rest of them are either Medicare or Medicaid. Thank you.
Thank you for the additional information. Mr. Schultz on a follow-up.
Yes, as I'm reading the resolution, it says that we're directing the county administrator to solicit bids for the management of River Bluff. So are we going to get we're going to make the actual decision once the bids have been let and we get the response from them?
Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you for the follow-up, Mr. Schultz. Any other questions by board members? One more time, Mr. Webster, and then we'll move on. Yes, sir.
Just one more. This has generated some questions in my noggin here. Are we short on employees now? Do we have enough employees to cover the 191 patients there currently, the residents? And would we have enough to go to 240?
Carla?
We would have to work on the staffing and get more staff on site. We're using a lot of agency staff right now, but there's the consultant that we have working there right now is working on a plan to help the administrator improve the staffing out there.
Okay, thank you. I mean, the elderly is very important. I think that we do our utmost for them. We can't forget about them. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Webster. And with that, we have item H, the authorizing the management of River Bluff Nursing Home by contract. Any other questions? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. Thank you very much, Mr. Jury.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And as I leave, Margie, one more time, because this is the last. I want to thank you on behalf of most everyone out there. The way that you have conducted yourself as county clerk, but most of all, the way you have conducted yourself at every budget hearing and worked with us on the way you handle your budget. I hope we have someone that takes your place that realizes the people of Winnebago County pay the bills. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Jury. Next item of business, Public Works Committee, Mr. Kelly.
No report.
No report. Thank you very much, Mr. Kelly. Next item of business, Public Safety Committee, Mr. Fiducia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Your Public Safety Committee has several items before you tonight. The first item is a resolution, this is pleasant, authorizing carcass disposal contract. That would be for animal services and animals.
You get all the fun ones. We have a motion by Mr. Fiducia authorizing carcass disposal, the carcass disposal contract. May I have a second? Mr. Westcott, Mr. Boomer, and Mrs. Red on the second. Any questions on board members on item B? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion. Oh, I apologize. Mrs. Red has a question.
I do. Thank you, Chairman. I do have a question. Are we picking up the carcasses in the county or the city picking those carcasses up?
I will defer to Ann and or our leader of animal services just to give a little clarification on that. Please come up for a mic if you don't mind.
We are responsible for picking up the carcasses within the county and the city, the different municipalities.
Does that answer your question, Mrs. Red?
Yes.
All right, thank you very much, and thank you for jumping in there. Any other questions on item B? Before the board, seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. Thank you very much. Mr. Fiducia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The next is a resolution renewing an annual maintenance agreement for X-ray scanners, and I so move.
Got a motion by Mr. Fiducia on the resolution renewing the annual maintenance agreement for X-ray scanners. I have a second by Mrs. Crosby. Any discussion by board members? Seeing, oh yes, sir, Mr. Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize for this, but on the previous item, we did not have the actual dollar amount, and if in the future we could have that as a part of the board packet, where whatever it is that we've agreed to pay, in this case to St. Francis Pet Cemetery, it would be appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Schultz. I'm sure we can make that accommodation. I appreciate the comment. The item before the board, we have a motion and I believe a second on item C, annual maintenance agreement for X-ray scanners. Any questions by board members? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. Thank you very much. Mr. Fiducia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The next item is a resolution authorizing the purchase of pre-owned vehicles for animal services, and I so move, and I'd also like to abstain on this one.
We have a motion by Mr. Fiducia on authorizing the purchase of pre-owned vehicles for animal services, and it's noted that Mr. Fiducia will abstain. A second by Mr. Booker, Mr. Westcott, and Mr. Nicolosi. Any discussion by board members? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? And of course, we have one abstention by Mr. Fiducia. Motion passes. Thank you very much, Mr. Fiducia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The next item is a resolution declaring that it is unlawful to distribute of prescription-controlled substances has created a public substance in a serious public health and safety crisis for the citizens of Winnebago County, and I so move.
So item E, we have a motion by Mr. Fiducia on the declaring that unlawful distribution of prescription-controlled substances have created a public nuisance and a serious public health and safety crisis for the citizens of Winnebago County, otherwise known as the opioid lawsuit discussed earlier in the month. We have a second by Mr. Nicolosi and Mr. Gorel. Any questions by board members? I have a hand up by Mr. Biondo.
Yes, if it was just for distribution, I would endorse it because it could have been illegally done. However, the drug manufacturers, there are different doses that they could put out there. The doctors could use those. Food and Drug Administration obviously approved the drug, and manufacturers are simply deep pockets, so I won't support it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Biondo. Mr. Webster.
Yeah, I actually feel very similar to the statements that Ted has just made, and furthermore, the resolution like this, it's, I don't know, we do these from time to time for various reasons, and it boils down to a feel-good. There's really no teeth in this. There's, you know, and I wonder sometimes why we even go through this exercise. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other comments by board members? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
No.
We have Mr. Schultz, Mr. Biondo, and Mr. Webster as no votes, and everyone else as a yes vote, I believe. Seeing that. And Biondo. On no votes, motion passes. Thank you very much. Mr. Fiducia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our next item is a resolution authorizing the execution of a collective bargaining agreement with the Illinois Fraternal Order of Police Labor Council representing the deputies in the office of the Winnebago County Sheriffs, and I so move.
We have a motion by Mr. Fiducia on item F, authorizing the execution of the collective bargaining agreement with the FLP. I have a second by Mr. Booker, Mr. Westcott, Mr. Jury, and Mr. Gorel. And I'll take any questions. Mr. Jury.
First of all, I'm going to support this because it's for our law enforcement officers. But Joe Hoffman and I sat in on those negotiations. They were long and strenuous. And I just want to thank the courts for raising the cost of those negotiations by what they did with 3-3 and raised the pay of starting people. I think that should be made public where that came from. I'm going to say it. I'm not running for office anymore. I don't need the votes. Because of these raises, people will be laid off because we can no longer exist on the money we have to pay everyone all of these increases. I didn't say I wanted people to be laid off. That's reality. We're facing the ASME contracts. That's going to increase our costs. We don't want to lay anybody off, but there's only so much money to go around. And you're not going to get it by raising taxes. Thank you.
Thank you. And just to I guess, build on and to pull apart what Mr. Jury talked about, the item before the board right now is the FLP Sheriff's contract, a 3-year contract. I believe there will be approximately $1.1 million of new money by the end of that contract term. I do see Mr. Carner here, and one of the things I do want to publicly thank Mr. Carner and the team in the Sheriff's Department, as well as Carla and the State's Attorney's Office on the FLP, and as well as Mr. Hoffman and Jury, is I do appreciate how hard everybody worked together on the management side in those discussions. I really do. What Mr. Jury referenced was the separate, so there's 4 union contracts that are coming to hit the budget here in the near term. The one where before the board is FLP Sheriff. We had the courts one that we talked about and had some media attention before Christmas, the circuit clerk contract, and then the big AFSCME contract is set to begin discussions on. So just so we see those as 4 separate conversations. But again, I wanted to say thank you to the team that helped lead those discussions, and I do appreciate it. And I have a follow-up by Mr. Hoffman.
Thank you, Chairman. I just want to add to my colleague what he said. As we sat in the negotiations, it was clear that our hands were hand-tied behind us once the court had negotiated the previous contract. It tied our hands in any arbitration suit, and I think I found it somewhat ironic that the very people that are on us about money were the ones that caused us to spend more money that they couldn't get. Thank you.
Again, thank you, and just to follow that up before I go to Mr. Biondo, the contract terms of this contract before the board, the FLP Sheriff, first year is 2.5%, second year is 2%, third year is 2%. For FLP Sheriff, what Mr. Hoffman's referring to is the 4-year courts contract, where I believe it was 3% a year times 4 years, and that's what I believe he was referring to there. Thank you, Mr. Hoffman, for your comments. I believe I have Mr. Biondo, and then I have Mr. Webster. Mr. Biondo.
Thank you. I spoke a lot at the meeting the other night that we had Tuesday night for the contract vote by the committees, Public Safety and Finance, and I was very much disappointed that no one from the Sheriff's Office attended that committee meeting concerning the Sheriff's contract. at all, and it is going to add 1.1 million to the county deficit through September of 2019. So I won't be in favor of it.
Thank you, Mr. Biondo. And I'm going to say this. I'm going to share a little bit of the blame on that one, on having the Sheriff's Department there. One of the things we're going to make a commitment to is making sure that there's coordination when there is a topic that touches a department. Yes, agendas go out. But we also had lapsed on a board meeting because of weather, and we're going to make sure out of our office and also working with folks that we make sure we have folks there. But I do appreciate your comments, and I am very long-winded, but I can also attest that my friend Mr. Biondo did have a lot to say at the recent meeting. Mr. Webster.
Yeah, thank you. Just one quick comment. It's kind of a shame that they couldn't forego these wages increase and dedicate that same amount of money to more corrections officers. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Mr. Webster. Any other comments by board members? Mr. Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is to Mr. Kurlikas. Has ideas been looked at trying to combine some of these unions? Has thought been given to combine some of these unions? There's 3 or 4.
That's really not in our control. Each union has its own bargaining unit. They have their own affiliations. Just to answer the question that was previously, I think maybe Mr. Webster stated, the corrections officers and the deputies are represented by 2 different unions. So asking the deputies to give up funds to apply to the corrections officers would work. But so I guess the answer to your question, Mr. Wilson, is no, because we don't have any say about that at all, about which union represents which bargaining unit. We have no say in that.
I just like a follow-up on that. And the place that I work, we used to have 2 unions, and we worked up the deal where we only had 1. It's why I asked the question. It may be possible if you don't go and try to do it, it'll stay the same.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your comments, Mr. Wilson. One of the things I do want to point out, just so that the management team and also the board in the item before us, there's not down the road any revisionist history. There are a few things baked into the FOP contract that are part of the past that were negotiated in many cycles ago that were not necessarily things that could come up. One of the things worth noting is, and if I'm off a percent, I apologize, but I'm in the ballpark. At let's say 20 years of service, a sheriff's deputy would get a 12% raise plus any negotiated increase. And that's not something, now that it's been baked into the contract, that necessarily you can get to in the next round of contracts, but it's certainly worth noting that there's some significant step-ups, and that's the most notable one that I've seen in the contract. Any other questions by board members? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Aye. We have Mr. Kelly on a no vote and Mr. Biondo on a no vote and Mr. Webster on a no vote. All other board members are yes votes. And motion passes. Thank you very much for the conversation. Mr. Fiducia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the lighter side here, Animal Services had 593 calls for service. We've been taking 118 dogs, 117 cats, 2 potbelly pigs, 1 livestock pig, 3 domestic rabbits, a parakeet, 2 lovebirds, and 7 wildlife. We have got off to transfer to rescue 15 dogs, 13 cats, and 2 potbelly pigs. And just in time for Valentine's Day, the 2 lovebirds went to a rescue. We've adopted 37 dogs, 43 cats, 2 domestic rabbits, 4 guinea pigs, 1 parakeet, and the livestock pig maybe went to Mr. Westgate, I'm not sure. So, that concludes my report. Margie, it's been real. Thank you.
I feel like the room was full before he started that, and then it just slowly emptied throughout the presentation. Mr. Hoffman has a question.
No, I don't have a question. I just got to thank him for the levity because I needed that.
Thank you, Mr. Hoffman.
But are those the same pot-bellied pigs that keep coming back?
We got to move them through the system. Next item of business is Government Affairs Strategic Planning Committee. Mr. Nicolosi.
Thank you, Chairman. Your Government Affairs and Strategic Planning Committee agenda just had one thing on the agenda here. We took no action. It is a 2018 proactive legislative initiatives and comprehensive agenda. And what that is our committee is going through things that we feel are pertinent that we should look at down in Springfield that can affect Winnebago County. We will have this fully done by our next committee meeting, and we'll have a vote for it then.
Any questions for Mr. Nicolosi? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The only thing I would just say regarding strategic planning is there's going to be a board retreat in late February. Look for that. There'll be more discussion on that in the coming weeks. Any unfinished business by board members? Any new business by board members? We do have one final appointment, and that is the North Park Fire Protection District, backdating to December 1 of 17. Mr. Jeff Vaughn came recommended, and I would call on Mr. Westcott.
I would like to suspend the rules and vote on this evening.
Thank you very much, Mr. Westcott. Got a motion to suspend the rules and vote this evening by Mr. Westcott, a second by Mr. Wilson and Mr. Hoffman and Mr. Nicolosi. All those in favor of suspending the rules signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion to suspend the rules. I would entertain a motion to approve Mr. Vaughn to the North Park Fire Protection District. I got a motion and a second I got a motion by Mr. Westcott, a second by Mr. Webster, and I do have two abstentions, Mr. McDonald and Mr. Nicolosi. All those in favor of appointing Mr. Vaughn to North Park Fire Protection District signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. I have good news and bad news. We do need to go to closed session, but it'll be short. So I entertain a motion to go to closed session. Mrs. Crosby, second by Mr. Fellers. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. And the reason we're going to closed session, of course, is threatened and pending litigation. We will see you all. We did take a vote. We'll see you in closed session in a minute. Thank you. In favor of adjourning, signify by saying aye. Any opposed? Have a great evening. Thank you very much. God bless America.